This morning we're going to start with our regular agenda. We have actually 5 items on the regular agenda today. The last 2 items have been deleted. We will not do 6 and 7. So if you don't have a revised edition, you can cross off everything past 5. The first item is a rezone petition. It's to consider a rezoning petition from general commercial to low-density residential for 2 lots generally located on the east side of 10th Avenue East, north of 1st Street East. The site is approximately half an acre. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Morning. I'm Rick Kleinwachter, 112 10th Avenue East. I just want to request a rezone. I believe it was zone residential at one time. Now it's general commercial. I just want to get it back to residential. Our homes are on there now. So.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Kleinwachter? When's the last time we looked at this property, Rick? Do you know?
This part we haven't, I don't believe.
It
was to the east of us, to
Okay.
the southeast.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
If there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this rezone petition, please feel free to come forward. If being none, anyone on the commission wish to make further comment? This time I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning recommend approval of the rezoning petition to request from General Commercial R1 as being compliant with the City Dickinson Comprehensive Plan and meeting all requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code.
Been a motion by Mr. Krieg.
Second.
Second by Mr. Tews. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification on that request and recommendations. I'm assuming that's 10th Avenue East.
112 10th Street East
10th
and
Avenue.
10th.
I'm assuming those should be.
Is it typo?
Let's see. No, those are on 10th Avenue.
10th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's on a north-south road.
10th Avenue then.
Yeah, Steve Josephson, city staff, yeah, those are on 10th Avenue.
Okay. Mr. Josephson, do you have a recommendation?
It's a recommendation of approval. One thing I did want to point out here is under the newly adopted comprehensive plan, future land use map shows that as being residential than the future land use map. So changing the zoning would make it consistent with the future land use map. And also, these are 2 viable single-family structures.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Well, I thank Mr. Josephson for pointing that out, that everyone has their comprehensive plans, final form, and that we are following that. Let it be noted. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommendation approved. Thank you, Mr. Kleinwachter. Item 2 on the regular agenda is another rezone petition. It's to consider a rezoning petition from community commercial to high-density residential. The site is in the Lamont First Edition subdivision, generally located in the northwest quarter of Section 34, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. Site is approximately 5.65 acres. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Thank you, President Abrahamson, Planning and Zoning Commission. Sean Soren, Boundary Engineering, here on behalf of Jeff Lamont and Lamont Corporation, who has made the request to rezone this lot to R3. As you may recall, when several months ago, we went through a replatting of this area, changed some street configurations of Sims Street. And part of that on the east side of Sims was a rezoning of that to an R3, and that was approved for a townhouse type development. Now this is, and at that time, this lot that's directly north of the Hampton Inn was as well looked at as going to an R3 zoning, and now they are requesting that this be rezoned to R3 to help with the buffer from the neighbors across the street, with the commercial that would be directly to the west of it and to the south of it. North of this property, there is currently a park in place, and it seems to be a good fit for that area.
Any questions at this time from Mr. Soren? Comments?
Well, so Sean, the zoned R3, is that part of this development that's you're saying this R3 would be a buffer to existing R3 that's currently developed, or? So the R3 to the...
It blends in with the R3 that's on the east side of Sims. This would be an R3 on the west side of Sims as well, and then there's commercial around this on two sides, on the east, or on the west and on the south side of this property.
And then the R3 to the east is part of this project? Or part of this
That's
development?
already been, yes, it's part of the development, but it's already been rezoned.
Okay. And is there any development on it?
Currently, no. Currently, right now, they're in the process of working with engineering to get some stormwater design things corrected and some of those issues fixed, so then they can go and get the street put in. And that's what they're waiting on, is get that infrastructure installed so they can start development.
Okay, thanks.
Any other
Chairman?
questions or comments for Mr. Soren?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Corton?
actually, the property is zoned to R2, and if I could have Mr. 2's double-check your zoning map to your right, it should be R2. I remember that one coming through. They wanted to do townhouses, and since it abutted next to residential, I believe we rezoned it to R2 instead of R3.
You're right, it's R2.
Yeah.
It's, wait, it's Shell CC on
Yeah.
there. No, it's the Northern stuff. This is R2,
I'm sorry, which,
No, I want, for
It would be-
clarification, which property are you saying is R2?
I'm referring to the property to the east, Tracy, at the northeast side of that. Yeah, okay. So it is R2. The reason for that is that when that came through to the east, a single family, we went R2 before we would do R3, and that's what they're proposing for that. So we already have that buffer already aligned, just for clarification purposes.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jackson?
to ask Mr. Soren, do you know, would the owners be open to a PUD rezoning? Something that...
Yes, I believe they would be.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Soren, anything else?
No, not if you don't have any more questions for me.
Thank you. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else in the public who would like to make comment on this rezone petition. Please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. I am Katie Culver. I represent the landowners as well as the Holiday Inn Express and the Hampton Inn. We are in favor of the rezoning. We think it would be a great buffer between the houses there and our commercial properties. And that's about all I have.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Culver? Thank you, Ms. Culver.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public who would like to make comment at this time? Please feel free to come forward. Mr. Josephson, would you like to make a recommendation on this, or any comments on this rezone petition?
Steve Josephson, City Planner, City of Dickinson. First of all, I want to hand out a letter we received, and we received this just earlier this week, and it's from a property owner to the north, and it is in opposition. And I did send an email of this letter to Mr. Soren yesterday. Mr. Soren yesterday. I also want to make a correction on the staff report on the second page where we have adjacent land uses, and to the east it says R1 and CC. That should be R2. And staff does recommend denial on the following basis. For one thing, compliance with the city's comprehensive plan. On the future land use map, the future land use designation for that property is residential. Also, we find it not in conformance with the comprehensive plan. It's also adjacent to commercial development to the south and west, as well as primarily commercial zoning to the east. And the introduction of high-density residential development into this parcel would result in potential conflicts between incompatible land uses. The impacts of the commercial, which has no restrictions on it upon any future residential development, especially at that density, there are potential conflicts between the two in terms of things like lighting, hours of operation, noise, traffic, and related ones. Additionally, the potential rezoning is not compatible to the emerging commercial development pattern in the vicinity. And then our final point is approval of the proposed rezoning is not consistent with the city's recent practice of approving multifamily development through the use of planned unit developments. And we had received 2 inquiries regarding the proposed rezoning, and you got a letter from one of them that was in opposition. The development pattern in that emerging one in that area is commercial. The future land use designation is the future land use designation is commercial. I said residential, it is commercial. So it's not consistent with the plan and not compatible with the emerging development pattern in that area. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Anyone have any questions at this time for Mr. Josephson?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jackson?
Mr. Josephson, help me here. You know, I recognize that it doesn't comply with the comprehensive plan. I know we also talked that this first year we may have some fine-tuning with the land use part of that comprehensive plan. This piece of land has been sitting for a lot of years and hasn't been developed. And I just keep saying to myself, if this is what would help it develop, you know, an infill kind of development, that I don't know why it would be so bad to go from CC to R3 here. It seems to me that it would be an appropriate transition to the residential to the east and north. Is good or better than CC, it would seem to me. I know when we originally zoned this, we did have some opposition from the residences to the east about the commercial aspects of this. So I'm just doing some soul searching here. I'm not sure I see that big an issue with this request.
Commissioner Jackson, if I think I would look at it in terms of this. If we didn't have the commercial development that's already, I believe it's what, to the south of that parcel, because I believe isn't that the hotel that's there? And you've also got some to the east of there, or to the west of there. You know, I think if you came straight down and that was all undeveloped, I would say, well, perhaps there's a, you know, there's a, you know, there's a point there. But you know, while that piece may lay vacant for now, the question is also with all of the residential development that we're going to be getting in this area, in the city, and the need for more commercial, if you rezone that and take that out, you know, you've also lost those opportunities for commercial within, you know, within the city and close to the core of the city and where a lot of that residential development is going to be occurring.
See, I guess I question that this is very desirable commercial property. Maybe others see it.
Yeah, we've got commercial to the north of it too, so northwest of the, well, we have commercial to the northwest of it too, so.
Yeah.
And again, I am concerned about the fact that you've got the existing CC zoning that's to the south and west of it and partially to the east of it. There's no restrictions on there in terms of hours of operations and other impacts on any residential in the future. And do you really, you know, from my perspective, you could be putting a pretty high concentration of people next to areas where there's going to be unlimited hours of operation, unlimited lighting, you know, no extra screening or buffering next to it. None of that is required under the existing CC zoning. So there's always that potential of creating a situation where you've got people moving in there and then suddenly they're impacted by the commercial that's only restricted by what's in our ordinance. You know, then you'd get compatibility issues. So I would say perhaps if the area around there was not developing, there would be a stronger case for that, but we see that it has been.
Well, the flip side is that I know we have concern about growing more R3 in the community, and that's why I asked about the PUD, because I think we could put some restrictions on how many units would be there with the PUD. I don't know what the rest of you think.
And this is just a straight rezoning. This is just a straight R3. So there's no opportunities to do things like limit the number of units, perhaps place a buffer, you know, like an oversized buffer or setback area between the commercial and try and mitigate those impacts. So under R3, they would be subject to whatever the development standards are in the code. So there's no opportunities to do that.
I understand, and I wouldn't be in favor of the R3, but I'm thinking we should be open to some compromise in there.
Well, perhaps, but the proposal that's before us today is for R3. And I think Mr. Corton had some comments that he wished to make.
Mr. Corton.
Yes, Mr. President, if I could just add, just from our analysis as well. As you noticed on the agenda item, I was going to talk about R3s, the apartments that we have, with respect to our comprehensive plan, where we tried to get it to a 70-30 ratio, 70% single family, 30% single family. I'm still getting my data back. The data is very close to that 70-30 mixture. I would not be in favor of additional apartments in this area. If we were going to allow additional allocation, I think it only makes sense to have it next to a major interchange, an area that would support that instead of this particular area. I would not be in favor of additional apartments in this area if we were going to spread out an allocation. That's a philosophical issue that I'd like to get input from the Planning Commission. I think that we should figure out where the apartments should be located generally with respect to roads, parks, amenities, and affected a commercial as well. And I think this particular area would not warrant additional increase for apartments. I would look at exit 59 and other areas in the town that would be more applicable for that, and that's for a future discussion. The transition area, if they're talking about R3, if they were really looking at that, then they would remove the CC that they have in the southeast corner. They're going to have a hotel there. That's a commercial use. Therefore, I think that removes the argument that R3 is a transition. No, you already have commercial between you and the residential. They are looking at townhouses in the R2 portion on the northeast corner. That would provide enough transition for that. I don't see that commercial, community commercial, based upon its impacts, are going to be probably anything of a adverse effect compared to R3, based upon what they want to do. The other thing, we have not blanketed R3. We have not given an R3 blanket approval in well over a year. We've been looking at doing PUDs for that. I wouldn't be in favor of a PUD either for that. I think we need to protect our commercial areas. The reason that this property hasn't developed is it may not be to demand. We've had constant debates and discussions with the developer, and unfortunately, it's been a year and they still haven't got their stormwater plan approved for the original replat that came in front of you a year ago. So it's not just demand, it has to do with the applicant as well. And I would strongly recommend denial on this application.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments, questions? I tend to, my comments on this are that I tend to agree with Mr. Croton, slightly agree with Mr. Jackson on the fact that PUD, something else has to be done here, but I do believe at this time we need to follow the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, and that we have been on a roller coaster ride with a number of R3s that have been approved and not developed, and there's a real problem arising that too many R3s on the books haven't been developed. And the fact that we've looked at this property, the property near there, it started several years ago with the possibility of water problems and rectifying them. And Mr. Corton brought out that the water situation still has not been resolved. So I think something else is probably going to have to be done with that property. But at this time, the request before us is a request to go to R3, and I personally don't think it should go that way. Anyone else have any comments? Any other comments from the public? If anyone in the public would wish to make comment, please feel free to come forward. Mr. Soren, would you like to add anything?
Just a couple comments, I guess. And I understand, and I knew the recommendation was coming before I came. But one of the things that strikes me, I guess, is the argument is that there's some commercial to the south of this property that's going to be a burden to it because of the commercial nature. But one of the issues that we're trying to do here with this R3, the access would be to Sims, and right across the street is an R2. If this doesn't get changed into a residential type, then you still have that commercial effect on all of those R2 properties as well. So we're not protecting anything by not rezoning this per se, because you're still creating that issue with those other residential properties. With the R3, it does create a buffer, and it's, all over we have R3 that does create, those buffers next to commercial property. The other item, major corridors and interchange. Highway 22's been the main corridor in Dickinson for forever. I see that shift in dynamics changing, and there's a lot of commercial that's being approved out on exit 59. And I understand they're going to want some R3 development too, but we still have a mall and a major commercial area, and multifamily does make sense next to that corridor that we currently have in town. So just a couple comments I have to add.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. Is there anyone else in the public who'd like to make comment? Please feel free to come forward. Anyone on the commission wish to make comment? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend denial of Dickinson Candlewood LLC's rezoning petition to rezone from CC to R3.
Been a motion by Mr. Grimm. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Jackson. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jackson.
you know, I'm going to vote in favor of the denial because it is R3. I wouldn't vote for R3. I'd still be open to the right PUD plan. But I'm also hearing about the stormwater thing. I wasn't aware of that. And I think we need to fix past shortcomings before we move forward. So that's another thing that I think we have to consider.
I fully agree with you on that, both those points. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Denial. And I hope with this here that Mr. Soren was aware of the recommendation of denial, but hopefully this is a unique piece of property, and that there's got to be, if the developer has a real interest in doing something with it, it looks to me like there's going to be some incentive to do a PUD or something that would satisfy everyone. I think the door is open to meet with the planners. Thank you very much. This time we have a special use permit, item 3, to consider a special use permit to allow for a multiple family development on a property zoned LC, Block 4 of Lot 1, Cooks Meadows Hills, 4th edition, in the northwest quarter of Section 28, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. Thank you for your time in advance. What we're looking at is on Block 2 of Lot 1 and 2. To the west of 2 is Lot 1. What we're asking for is a special use permit to do the plan that I think is in front of you with multifamily, R3 apartments.
At this time, does anyone have any questions or comments?
I'd like to ask Mr. Kitson what the proposed time frame is for this construction.
Sorry about that. I should have said Quentin Kitson with New Vision Construction. Sorry. Anyway, the time frame for this is plans are done as we speak right now. We're hoping for approval and then go through the permit process. July 1 would be our dig date.
You'd be in the ground July 1?
July 1, yeah. I think from this meeting, our soonest would be the June commission meeting.
Are you
And
aware,
then, pardon me?
aware that one of the recommended conditions is that the special use permit only be given for 1 year?
Right, yes,
Okay.
I was aware of that.
And,
Yep.
and does that mean that everything would have to be started within a year, or what does that mean?
No, the condition on that, Commissioner Jackson, would be that they have to have 3 building permits issued and the foundations poured and approved.
Sorry, I see it.
So a significant amount of the project would have to move forward before they can do that. Otherwise, they would lose that allocation entitlement.
And Mr. Catan shared that with me, so we're
And there's also a 6-month extension of that under extenuating circumstances, supposedly, that if there was enough reason to be met, it could go to a year and a half.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it could go. It would have to be, for staff's perspective, based upon the apartments and the rest that are happening in our totals that we do have, it would need to be a good one. It would need to be something that's probably out of their control, that they couldn't move forward with it. Otherwise, they have a year, there's a demand for that. I think that's fair to give them that. They can't meet it in a year, then you can make a call that it's probably a speculative venture. And if that's the case, then I think it's fair for us, if we're going to start restricting apartments, that we would reuse that allocation to somebody else that has plans already designed and the ability to be able to, finance and to be able to make that come to fruition. So that's the idea of the condition. Mr. Kitson is aware of that, and I think that condition is appropriate for this particular special use permit.
And on this special use permit, what percentage of completion would satisfy it? Say they decide they want to do, they end up doing 6 out of 7 or 5 out of 7. Is that called completion?
As long as they get over to 3 for that, then I would consider this to be vested in. So within that year period, if they get 3 building permits, pour the foundations, and get those foundations approved, then I'd consider that condition is vested in, and then they can move forward with it. If ultimately they decide to build less, which on this particular development, there's a lot of it that needs to be built altogether, they can do so. And if that's the case, then if we're going to restrict the apartment allocation, then we'd come back and throw that back in and say, okay, we have an additional 50 dwelling units that could be available based upon whatever criteria that we come up with.
So the special use permit for those remaining unbuilt ones would be gone. That would be written in that property would no longer have a special use permit on the percentage that wasn't built on.
No, it'd be for the 3 that for the development itself.
So the special use permit will end up being just on those that are finished. Because we're applying a special use permit to this property.
Correct.
And if the full amount of property is not used for that, that special use permit should not be held and applied.
Well, I had looked at 3 buildings to be erected for that. Now, what we could do, if your question is, do we want to gear it directly, I've looked at this as a unified development, do we want to specifically say the LC property that you need to have 3 units within the LC property? That would make a lot of sense. I didn't specifically address that issue. I don't see that should necessarily be a problem. Mr. Kitson?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding where we're going.
On the else on the
Right,
on the
right. As you look on the plan, part of the buildings, I think only 1 building actually ends up on the LC, and then 3 of them are kind of split between the 2. To probably even furthermore answer the question, our intent was to come in and get the permits for everything at once. And actually, we got a 9-month build on this, is what we're contracted for. So I'm hoping we're not coming back revisiting the special use permit. But I'd be in favor of however you guys would want to tie it to the adjacent lot or however. So
Yeah, I look at it fairly simple that, what people have said they're going to do and have done and haven't done, and we do a special use permit on a property, and some unforeseen thing could come up, and the property doesn't get used that way, or half of it does. Then what are we going to be sitting and dealing with? Who's going to come back for a different request on something that the special use permit did not get fully used? And what does that property then end up in limbo? They're going to say, well, we'd like to do this with it now instead.
correct.
Or not. It's a simple thing, but I think we've been down that road before where all of a sudden there's properties that people have proposed to do things on, and it just didn't happen.
And I'm aware of that situation, and it's been brought to my attention several times. I think that was one of the things that we were trying to bring was a project that was going to start immediately, and hopefully no promises, just do it. And so I don't think I mean, I definitely don't have any problem with how you want to tie the timelines to the project, within within reason there, but the 1 year and all that, I guess we're hoping completion and rent out is before the 12 months has even come up.
Well, I think Mr. Corton's come up with a good timeline for you. I think that's very agreeable.
Mr. Chairman, we could just refer to it as, the plans are depicted. You have, as he had mentioned, one building definitively adjacent to State Street and the other three that are kind of close and being split between the districts. I would modify the condition that the three buildings would have to be the three buildings, or 3 out of the 4 buildings that would be part of the LC zoning district have to be built in the first year. To the right is R3, and in essence, that's not what we're talking about today. We're showing that as a unified plan, and the reason why they're coming forth with that, but I would modify the condition that that would just be for the LC property. So they would have to have the 3 buildings completed in or under construction in a year up to foundation. And I don't see that should be a problem at all with Mr. Kitson, so the applicant's in agreement with that condition.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Kitson? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners, Bob Sivak, Dickinson Fire Department. I know this is strictly just a preliminary plat stage, and this is probably something that we should be able to address further down the road at the building permit stage. But I would just like to make this a matter of public record at this time that the way we see things depicted on this map at this time may cause some fire department access issues that the developer needs to be aware of. I need to say it at this time because it has happened to us further down the road where the developer or the contractor has said, where were you at preliminary plat stage? Why are we only finding out about it now? So I want to say that depending on the length of the buildings and depending on the setback of those buildings from the road that becomes our access road, there may be issues with how we see it depicted here at this point in time. So I'd strongly encourage the developer and the contractor to keep the fire department access on their minds and to keep us in the loop as they move towards final plat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steven. And for public notice here, we do have a condition addressing the fire department and the city engineer's concern about infrastructure and fire flow on this property prior to a building permit issuance.
Mr. Chairman, I've also mentioned that to Mr. Kitson that we wanted to have the renderings. We wanted to know that this is a project that they have thought through, that they have ideas of how the building is going to be and the placement for that, and not a speculative venture. And I told them that we would, as the building permit went through, there may be adjustments to that, but the overall plans that are depicted are not definitive approved by departments and the rest, and he's aware of that condition. I do want to just put on the record that I had spoken to Mr. Kitson. Condition 6 refers to the infrastructure-related issues. We do know that the area has insufficient fire flow for that, and he's aware of that issue, that if that is not corrected or if it's shown that we don't have it, and I presume that'd be the rate that they're aware of, they may have to put in a holding tank in order to address the sprinklers with respect to each of the buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Corton. Any other comments or questions? If there's anyone else in the public who'd like to make comment, please feel free to come forward. Being none, we'll close the public portion of this. And at this time, I would ask Mr. Corton if he has a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend the approval of the special use permit for multifamily with the attached conditions of approval to be inserted as part of the final resolution that would go to the City Commission.
This time I'd ask for a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept recommendation of staff and approve the request.
Second. Been motion and a second. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommended approval. Thank you. Item 4 on the regular agenda today is a preliminary plat. To consider a preliminary plat for Washington's 5th edition, formerly known as the Creekside subdivision, situated south of the 10th Street East extension and generally described in the northwest quarter of Section 2, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Commissioners and city staff. Randy Jenigas with SEH, along with Mr. Brian Bachman representing Meyer Real Estate Development Group. I think Mr. Corton drafted out the city staff analysis recommendations very well. My plan is not to get into much depth in this. I think it's very well organized in front of you. This is approximately 15 acres development site. We're looking at R1, just strictly R1 development, meeting R1 standards. Meets minimum lot widths, sizes, setbacks, street widths, that sort of thing. If you recall, our previous plat was a PUD, and this is not a PUD, just regular R1 standards. As far as utilities, just grabbing those utilities, city infrastructure from the existing streets and pulling it into the development.
Anyone have any questions or comments at this time?
Where did we end up on the Creekside plat? Did we approve preliminary?
Mr. Chairman, we approved the preliminary plat on that one, and they are not moving forward with that. So in essence, it will, when it runs out in a year, it'll be voided.
Can I ask one of you two gentlemen, what are the plans for the rest of the property that was in the Creekside?
At this point, there's no plans for those right now, for the rest of it. Just the plan for right now is to do these 15 acres.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Krieg?
I guess my main main concern would be 10th Avenue East, and how does that fit with our master plan study? Is that considered a urban collector, or, I mean, now we have a dead end, obviously, it goes into a farmstead and further east into a swampland that unreasonable to think we're going to be able to keep that 10th Street on the section line. So, I mean, I guess that'd be my main concern, is having a through street in that area.
Commissioner Krieg, I'm not understanding your comment. Are you saying that you don't think that 10th Street should go? We show it as part of our comp plan, but based upon the discussions after Creekside went through, it was kind of felt that probably 10th is not going to go through at this time unless there's development up north, and as they do, we'll address it on a case-per-case basis. But it is a collector. This development, it is paved already through where you would see Lot 1 that they show. So in essence, they would their road construction would probably take place at 11th Avenue East, because 10th is paved up through their project. And then anything going to the east, we would have to look at with respect to our comp plan and the rest. But we may change, we may come back with a modification to a comprehensive plan and not show 10th Avenue or 10th Street going through. That's under discussion. So we may come back with a modification as part of our, an annual update as part of our comp plan.
And again, my concern would be for having a through street there at 10th Avenue. Obviously, if it's not going to go follow the section line, it's going to have to swing south. And if we approve something here, we're restricting ourselves there. I mean, I'm not opposed to this. I think there's still room, but on the other end, I'm trying to keep something open or a long-term plan of what are we going to do with 10? And should that be a part of this process currently?
I'm looking at the larger piece, the Chinago piece. You know, we're looking at 10th Avenue when it goes through. When that is warranted, when development occurs north or south, we'll extend 10th. And from there, I think that we would look at making sure that 10th Street continues on to a point undetermined based upon the application, and ultimately somehow, some way would connect to 25th. But at this point, I don't see that that the way they have it proposed, that we need to continue 11th going further past Baker Avenue. They do have it proceeding north. There will be challenges going north. There will be significant amount of grading for that project, but we'll review the Chinago piece, and the connectivity of 10th Street going to the east will have to be through either the north or the south side when that bigger development occurs.
So at this time, with this property, engineering feels that the road undesignated name through the property from 10th Street East, and it can exit or enter it on, it'll be approximately 5 other streets, will be sufficient for this flow. Should be fine.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're looking at, I think, 51 lots for this development with 7 access points. It's more or less a continuation. That's why they changed the name from Creekside to Washington 5th. It's a continuation of what has happened, transpired in the past. Staff's in favor of that. The bigger Chinago piece, when that comes through, will address more macro issues, but this is a continuation of the prior plats, the way we're looking at it today. That's why we brought this forth as a new plat and not a modification to the existing Creekside.
And the notation that the stormwater would be, come from the plan of the larger Creekside development. Now, the Creekside development is going to sit on a shelf, and
They'll need to submit new plans to update it specifically for this development. We've done a very quick cursory review just to establish a condition. That issue would need to be resolved. We'll have to have a thorough review and determine where they're proposing on bringing it, and is that consistent with city code? But at this point, the existing Creekside one had a macro overview. They're going to have to modify it and specifically address the Washington 5th.
thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much. This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this. Please feel free to come forward. Any other comments from the commission? And I'd ask at this time if Mr. Corton has a recommendation.
I would recommend approval based upon the 9 conditions that are established in the staff report to be attached as part of your motion.
Staff recommends approval. This time I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
And Mr. Tews.
I'll make the motion to approve with the staff recommendations, all 9, and no modifications to the recommendations.
Thank you, Ben. There's been a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Been a second by Mr. Grimm. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Krieg.
I guess before we go any further in this development, I'd like to see something on 10. I mean, I'm okay with what's proposed. I think just for future, next time around, be nice to see something for 10th there, a little more defined.
Mhm. I think that's a good, I think that's a good thought that should be put in place now. For all the possibilities that could happen to 10th, or what could happen north of this property, that the ongoing modification and relooking at our comprehensive plan, what, should be a little bit of thought put into that by someone?
Well, as that project moves forward, I don't think that the developer, I can't comment for them, I don't think that they're involved in the remainder of the Chenal piece as they were before. That being said, if they are and they move forward with that, they'll have to address that condition based upon our transportation element of our comp plan. And if we, after looking at it, basing it, would recommend a modification to the comp plan, we would have a motion in addition to preliminary plat and a rezone for that, a comp plan amendment to change that particular element to declassify, let's say, if we didn't feel that that collector should go all the way to 25th, to revise that collector to a local access road and a general depiction, and you would do a modification as part of that would be an additional process. So you'd modify the comprehensive plan, that specific section, in addition to what you have going for you as part of the approval process. But we're aware of that. We've looked at it, so when development occurs for that property, and that may not occur for a significant period of time. At this point, we'll address that accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Cortana. I'm glad the awareness was brought up, because I know you guys, everybody needs more time, and to look at that very closely with all the possibilities would take somebody a whole lot of time, but the awareness is there that if development comes up, that the notation is there that it's going to have to be looked at and satisfactory to the city. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommended approved. Thank you very much. Item 5, we have a zoning text amendment item on the agenda. To consider a zoning text amendment to amend the sign regulations in Article 3910 of the Dickinson Municipal Code. Mr. Josephson, at this time, do you have a brief statement?
We do need to get out of here, so Steve Josephson, county staff, and I think we're going to make it. These are some proposed changes to the municipal code, Article 39.10 sign regulations, and just some highlights. Some highlights of it would be the code. Much of it is an update of definitions. There's also requires that a sign plan be submitted for developments with non-residential developments with 3 or more tenants. And also, if the new changes were made, it would prohibit pole signs and roof signs, would include the definition of pylon signs, which is essentially 2 poles and your copy face is in between both of those, and reduces the ground sign height. So in the case of pylon signs, if it was next to the interstate, it would be 45 feet, and along other roads, 25 feet. It also requires that signs match the architectural features of on-site structures. And there's also some emphasis too on the use of monument signs. All signs are to be set back 10 feet with a maximum height for monument signs of 6 feet. However, for every foot back that a monument sign would be moved, they would get a foot of height. And excuse me a moment here, the maximum height of, pardon me a second here, with a maximum height of 30 feet when adjacent to the interstate to I-94, or 15 feet when adjacent to state highways, arterial roadways, collectors, and road signs. So I hope you've had a chance to look this over, and just wanted to know if you had any questions about the proposed amendments.
Any questions? Mr. Krieg?
Mr. Chairman, just a question. Is there anything on the maintenance of these signs, or, there's signs in town that have been up for 20, 30 years, and yeah,
as long as they're
abandoned, but
well, as long as they're maintained and in good working order, they're allowed to stay as is. However, if a sign if it's not been maintained, if it's been abandoned, for 180 days, then it's considered non-conforming, and it's supposed, I believe it's supposed to be removed. So we have a number of these where the signs just sit and there's no tenant, nobody taking care of it.
So then the city would have the
It's
right...
considered an abandoned, and that was a definition we put in here, was about abandoned signs. That abandoned sign, a sign which for a period of 180 consecutive calendar days or longer, no longer advertises or identifies a legal business establishment or product of activity. So that becomes abandoned, it becomes non-conforming, and it needs to be removed. And it can't be, if someone comes back and says, I want to put a sign here, it's got to conform with any new provisions in the code.
How about the upkeep, though? I mean, just after a certain period of time, they either need to put in a new sign, I mean, just fading and things like that. Is there anything that addresses that for the maintenance, or is that something we don't want to go there?
Well, it talks about the maintenance and in good shape with respect to the sign. You know, to be quite frank with you, the way things are in the last couple of years, and even prior to that, prior to things getting busy, the city did not enforce the sign code. That's why you have signs that are 30, 40 years old that the business hadn't even been there. And we're in the process of removing one or two as part of the Villard project, because they're in our city right away, and we'll just remove them as we move forward on that project. But you know, it's just an issue of staff having the time to do that. To answer your question, yes, they're supposed to keep them in a decent shape. If they're not, then you can go through the process of notifying them and getting them to bring it up to compliance. That normally isn't the case for an active business, because an active business, that's part of their appearance. Maybe some industrial-related ones are not necessarily concerned, but in the commercial areas, the ones that are most visible areas, people tend to keep their signs together because that just shows that it's a reflection of their business. So I don't know if that answers your question. Going back to the signs, if it's after 100 and 120 days and it's no longer there, yes, at that point, we can go through the process to have them remove it because they're no longer have an active business there. It's an off-premise sign, which is prohibited per the code. But we have not been actively enforcing that. That's something with additional staff that I'm looking at doing, and that's why we wanted to update our sign regulations before we move forward with that.
Yeah, I was just aware of one across from the dairy barn there that faded.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jackson.
You know, I haven't read all of this yet, but what I have seen and what I see in the summary, the only thing that leaps out at me is, maybe being controversial, is the elimination of pole signs. We probably have a lot of pole signs right now in Dickinson, I would expect.
Yes.
Do other communities in North Dakota prohibit pole signs, do you know?
That I haven't found so much of, but I know that a national trend has been to move away from pole signs, pole signs. I think they found that by the use of pylon signs, the message is there in most traffic situations. You know, most traffic situations, people are able to see the message. So, and keep in mind, the signs that are there now, as long as they're maintained and there's no changes made to them, they're legal nonconformities.
I understand that. So, in a newly developing area, you know, the Menards and the Cashwise Grocery, what kind of signs are we likely to see out there under this ordinance?
To answer your question, Mr. Commissioner, Menards has already submitted, I believe, their sign permit. So until this is enacted, they would conform to their existing code.
Okay.
Cashwise, most of the projects within that are all looking at pole signs, which to me, personal preference issue is, it's an aesthetic one, and it's not beneficial to a development. Pylon signs are standard for most communities. As you move and you start to pay attention to aesthetics and values of your visual corridors, they could do that. Now, a pole sign, they could have that, but what we would require would be an outside component that they could do at relatively inexpensive rate in order to cover up the pole sign to make it a pylon sign per our code. But until this is adopted, Right now, we do allow pole signs, and probably a significant number of the development in the Roars development will probably have poles. At least everyone has submitted, has talked to me, and I've spoken to many of the developers. They're proposing pole signs.
You know, Mr. Chairman, we've looked at this 3 or 4 meetings. I wonder if it's not time to go to public hearing and
I think so. And any modifications, this can be modified as it goes along. And so
Absolutely.
I think it's be appropriate probably to take action on it so further developers know what to expect.
Absolutely. And, you know, we can always see what works and what doesn't, and there may be other things that come along that, you know, we're going to have a downtown, we get a downtown redevelopment plan, and what may come out of that could be some changes to signs in the redevelopment area too. So we may get some specifics, you know, according to what area of the city we're in.
So I think it would be appropriate for you to make a recommendation at this time.
We recommend approval of the proposed changes. Staff recommends approval of the proposed changes to to section 3910 of the municipal code sign regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Josephson. Anybody have any questions, any further questions, comments? Is there anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this? Anyone else on the commission wish to make comment? This time I'll close public portion of this hearing and ask for a motion to approve this zoning text amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the revisions to the article covering sign regulations, Dickinson Municipal Code is included in attachment A, as being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion is second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Mr. Toots opposed. Motion carried. Recommended. Thank you, Mr. Josephson. This time I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. The motion adjourned. Is there a second? All those in favor?